Last lesson of Unit 4. So here we go. We're going to talk about how the Cold War expanded. So you're going to see other happenings, other parts of the world now getting involved, and this is where it's going to get really scary for people in the United States. So again, make sure you're listening for the effects. I mean, if you haven't picked up on it by now, when you look at one cause or one thing in American history, it's going to have a domino effect, and that's really the big deal. I just want you to be able to recognize this for the rest of your life. So, again, I'm going to talk about something very specific today, and it's going to be talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I just want you to grasp why this is all such a big deal, I guess you would say, and why this was so scary. So, where this is going to expand is that the Soviet Union, something I haven't talked about quite yet, they are going to go on a rampage. They are going to want to try to develop their own atomic bomb. So, going back to us dropping the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we used it and know that the Soviet Union, all this while, they were also trying to develop their own because they wanted one too. Well, in September of 1949, they actually developed and tested their own atomic bomb. So you can see the picture on the top here. This is from their first atomic bomb test. And you're going to notice that this is right around the same time when the Soviet Union, or sorry, when China is becoming communist. So again, we had other fish to fry during this time. But the United States, not to be outdone, we're going to develop what's known as the hydrogen bomb. So take a look at this map on the bottom here. So that inner circle there, that is the size of the blast radius of our bomb that we dropped on Hiroshima. So notice how small that is, 2 miles. The H bomb is 10 times larger. Actually, sorry, 1,000 times larger. And you're going to notice that that is big. So, why would we ever want to? Well, we had to outdo the Russians, pretty much, or the Soviet Union. So, this is going to spark something called the arms race, where we are going to try to have a bigger arsenal of nuclear weapons at our disposal than what the Soviet Union can possibly do. Well, the problem is the Soviet Union has spies everywhere, so they actually developed their own hydrogen bomb shortly after we developed ours. So, our president during the time, Eisenhower, knowing the dangers of war, doesn't really want to spend billions of dollars on troops, but instead he wants to start building up nuclear weapons. He knows that if you have a big bite to back up your bark, it doesn't really matter how many troops you have, as long as you're able to drop that big one on them. So, you're going to notice that Eisenhower is going to make a huge push for that. So, to give you an idea of how much of a push, take a look at the numbers here. So in 1960, it was Eisenhower's last year in office. So if you look at the chart, we grew a lot. The Soviet Union, yes, they also grew a lot, but not near as much as what we did in terms of how many nuclear weapons we had at our disposal. So, which term is used to describe the United States and the Soviet Union beginning to build nuclear arms at an accelerated rate? So it's also worth noting that we talked about Joseph Stalin dying during the Korean War. Well, you're going to notice that the Soviet Union, they're also going to get a new leader. His name is Nikita Khrushchev. He's going to be around for a while, so you don't have to know how to spell his name, but you should be able to recognize his name. So Nikita Khrushchev is actually going to be a little bit open compared to Stalin. Stalin was very big on secrecy, remember the Iron Curtain type of thing. Well, anyways, Nikita Khrushchev is going to be a little bit more open to talking with the West, the United States, if you will. So he actually met with Eisenhower in Geneva in 1955, as you can see there, and they had a really, really good meeting. They made an agreement not to invade any other countries. However, the Soviet Union did what the Soviet Union does, and they basically invaded countries in the Middle East right afterwards. So this is how they're actually going to expand. They're going to be imperialistic during this time. So what Eisenhower did, he basically came up with something called the Eisenhower Doctrine and basically said, any country in the Middle East that needs help from not becoming communist, you let us know. We got you. So this is where you're going to see Eisenhower's terms are going to start being done. So it's important to note that during his time, he actually built the interstate highway system. This is a big military thing. So, yes, it helps everyday civilians like you and me get around from point A to point B, but it's actually a military purpose. He was a student of history. He studied the Roman Empire, how roads basically got them from everywhere they needed to go. So, he wanted to do this here. The roads are actually designed to move military supplies from coast to coast. And if you notice, we have a lot of highways that go from coast to coast. I-80 to be especially true. But it's also during this time that it's worth noting that he was known for being a very trustworthy person. Really restored a lot of like faith in the government until the end, where we basically got caught spying on the Soviet Union. They shot down one of our planes, the U 2 spy plane. And this basically proved that Eisenhower was a liar, which, yes, that did hurt his tail end of his reputation, but he's still seen as a good president and a good man, too, by that. So, again, take you back to, again, families living in the suburbs really benefited from those highways. So, in the last couple of slides, was containment mentioned? Kind of switching up the questions on you. So, enter in the 1960 election. So, Eisenhower, his vice president, Richard Nixon, is actually running for president. And he's running against this new fresh face named John F. Kennedy. Somebody I've already mentioned, and you already know how this is going to end, so I'll make it pretty quick. But Eisenhower campaigned hard for Richard Nixon to be elected in. However, the people of the United States were kind of getting into the baby boom era, I guess you would say, and they just recognized a need for a younger president. And Richard Nixon wasn't really that old, but he did not appear as young as JFK. And he was a really charming dude. I mean, he really knew how to work a crowd, I guess you would say. But why this is all such a big deal is that JFK is going to win. And not only is he going to win, he's going to basically change up what Eisenhower did. Where Eisenhower basically said, we're going to spend a lot of money stockpiling weapons and basically have this arms race happening. JFK not only did that, but then also still built up nuclear weapons. So this really sent a strong message to the rest of the world that the United States is not screwing around. Do not mess with our military. Don't push our buttons, I guess you would say. So when JFK is going to approach this Cold War from a new perspective, he is going to come out swinging. So he thought that Eisenhower, with all of his kind of peaceful talk, I guess you would say, we lost a lot of ground. So what he did is that's why he spent all that money. But all in all, this is happening. Nikita Khrushchev, somebody I mentioned earlier, is going to make friends with a very important and long lasting history of a country in Cuba to our immediate south. This raises a ginormous red flag for us because now not only is containment failing, but now the communist government is 90 miles away from the United States. So that location is going to come back to bite us here in a little bit. But in the process of becoming communist, people inside of Cuba are not going to like it, especially the middle and the wealthy class. So they're going to bounce. They're going to move to Florida. So if you ever wonder why Florida has such a huge Cuban population, this is it. So, question in the last couple of slides: which country just became communist and received aid from the Soviet Union? So, let's build on that whole idea of Cuba and why it's so important. So, here's a map. Okay, you notice at the top of the map, Florida's right there. Cuba, right there, 90 miles. So, not only does the Soviet Union have the technology to shoot rockets up into space, I'd be willing to bet they had the technology to shoot rockets from the island of Cuba to Florida. So, what this is now going to get back to is a plan that Eisenhower had for when his vice president Richard Nixon was going to win the presidency, and it's going to be called the Bay of Pigs. But the glitch in the plan was JFK won, not Nixon. So, this plan now gets shifted over to JFK. He gives the final okay and green lights the whole thing. So, when this all happens, this idea failed miserably. So, what the whole point was to take people that fled from Cuba, train them to be soldiers, go down to Cuba, and have them retake their island. And you just can't do that. So, Where this is all going to hit a major snag is that there was no air cover, and JFK kind of delayed that. And we forgot about daylight savings time and time zones, I guess you would say. So that's kind of why it fails. But this is going to throw a major wrench into our relationship with Cuba. They are going to be very paranoid about the United States doing things like this in the future. So, as you can imagine, they have a very powerful friend, and this is where things are going to get interesting. And that is where they're going to basically start moving missiles in immediately. But we didn't notice right away because there were some other major happenings going on at the same time. So JFK and Khrushchev, they're going to basically meet in Berlin. They're going to try to hash this out and talk it out with diplomatic ties, I guess, diplomatic talk, I guess you would say, diplomacy. But they just got more angry at each other. And shortly thereafter, Khrushchev is going to give the go ahead to build an iconic symbol of the Cold War called the Berlin Wall. So this is going to make things obviously worse. So now this concrete wall is going to go right down the middle of Berlin, and it's going to separate communism from capitalism. And it's going to be the symbol, and I'm going to talk about it falling in lesson 6, and this is going to be a big, big deal. And again, while that's happening, the Soviet Union is going to start moving missiles into Cuba. And we are going to see this on basically a spy mission, I guess you would say. So Castro agreed to put these on the island of Cuba because of those tensions that he had with the United States. When JFK finds out, he immediately orders these missiles must be removed because it just put the United States into mass hysterics. People were building bomb shelters, people are stocking up on food. Like in schools, they practice these things called duck and cover drills where they went underneath their desks because, in case you didn't know, your desks actually can repel radiation and withstand a bomb. That's sarcasm, by the way. But when this all goes down, we actually move our Navy around the island of Cuba to make sure that nothing else would be able to get in. So this is all a big deal because obviously now Cuba's mad at us, the Soviet Union's going to be mad at us, and we have to somehow de-escalate all this. So the Bay of Pigs operation resulted in the construction of what on the island of Cuba? So when these missiles are in place, the United States is on edge for almost a solid month. And you're going to notice that every waking moment of JFK's life, he was wanting updates on what's happening in Cuba, what's happening with talks. So it's actually going to take JFK to reach out to Nikita Khrushchev via mail, so writing letters back and forth, where they're going to work out an agreement of how to get the missiles off of Cuba. So what actually Nikita Khrushchev does is actually something that's fairly brilliant. He is going to say, "Mr. President, you take your missiles out of Turkey, we'll take ours out of Cuba." But the problem was nobody really knew that the United States had the same type of technology, nuclear weapons pointed at Moscow. So here's where we're kind of being a little bit hypocritical. We had missiles pointing at the Soviet Union, and we were telling the Soviet Union to take their missiles and not point them at us. So, as you can imagine, this isn't going to sit well. So, nobody really knew about it during the time. Now everybody knows about it. But again, JFK says, "Yep, we'll remove our missiles from Turkey as long as you get yours away from Cuba, and all is good." And they basically made a promise to, basically talk to each other on this thing called the hotline if tensions ever were to get amplified again. So here's my last question for you. True or false? The Cuban Missile Crisis caused mass hysteria in the United States.